The Negev Desert stretched endlessly under a silver moon, its dunes rolling like silent frozen waves. Every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally, as if the desert itself breathed, watching, waiting. The air was dry, heavy, yet carrying an almost imperceptible hum, a vibration that unsettled the bones of men who had walked these sands for years. At first the patrol thought it was the wind, shifting the loose sand, playing tricks on the eyes. But the shadows grew, larger, deliberate, moving against the wind's flow. Something was out there, stalking, calculating. The men tightened their grips on rifles, hearts hammering, every instinct screaming that they were no longer alone. Lieutenant Avraham Ben Ari, commanding officer of the unit, later described the scene in his journal. Shapes appeared along the ridge, massive arthropod in form, yet towering, impossible. Claws clicking rhythmically, like the ticking of some infernal clock. The men froze, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility. He scribbled ink smudged by trembling fingers, a warning that would remain hidden for decades. The desert held its secrets close. Tracks appeared, then vanished, swallowed by sand before anyone could follow. Dust swirled around armored vehicles, creating mirages of giants moving just beyond sight. Voices whispered, carried by the wind. Some said it was the men speaking to one another, but even those who listened closely swore they heard something else. A low, clicking resonance. Unearthly. Not quite animal, not quite human. Bedouin guides, when asked, muttered warnings of the sand guardians, colossal scorpions older than memory, said to roam the dunes during nights of a pale moon. Their eyes, they claimed, glowed like lanterns, reflecting fear back into the soul. Soldiers had laughed at these stories at first, folklore meant for children, until night fell and disbelief turned to dread. By midnight, the unit was scattered across a stretch of dunes, some climbing ridges, others scanning flatlands for signs of the enemy. But the enemy they now feared was no one's imagination. One private stumbled across enormous half-buried tracks. The sand hardened strangely around them. The footprints were too wide, too deep, impossibly large, disappearing into nothing, as if the earth itself had swallowed the creature whole. Then came the sound. First faint, then unmistakable. Claws scraping rock and sand, echoing across the dunes. A rhythm mechanical yet alive. The men froze. Radios crackled. Static swallowed every word. In the distance, two glowing eyes appeared, immovable, unblinking, watching, waiting. The desert had claimed the night, and perhaps it was hungry. No one slept. No one dared speak. Some recorded the moments in journals, handwriting jagged. Others swore they saw silhouettes against the horizon, larger than camels with tails lashing and pincers raised. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The desert had become a theater of terror, blending fact with folklore. And the men realized they were not alone. Even the wind seemed to obey it, carrying whispers across the dunes. Beware the sand guardians, the voices seemed to say. Those who chase the shadow are never seen again. The patrol moved slowly, every step a negotiation with fear. Every glance to the horizon felt like a confrontation with some ancient sentinel. By the first light of dawn, half the unit had vanished. Only scribbled notes, scattered equipment, and fleeting footprints remained. Lieutenant Ben Ari's journal closed with a single line: "The desert remembers, and it does not forgive." The year was 1965. The Negev Desert stretched like an endless ocean of sand and rock. Israeli Special Forces, still a young and fiercely disciplined unit, had been dispatched to survey strategic routes, test endurance, and map the unforgiving terrain. Commanders spoke of routine reconnaissance, yet the desert had a different agenda. Every dune, every jagged ridge seemed alive, shifting shadows, whispering winds, and the weight of centuries pressing down on every soldier's shoulders. Lieutenant Avraham Ben-Ari oversaw the patrol. His men trained rigorously for the harshest conditions, heat, dehydration, navigation, under moonless nights. But no training could prepare them for what the Negev concealed. Guides warned of strange occurrences. Villages spoke in hushed tones about nights when travelers vanished, when animals fled in terror for no reason. Ben-Ari dismissed it at first as superstition. The desert's folklore meant to scare the uninitiated, until his men returned shaken, recounting what they had seen. Camps were set up along dry wadis, fires flickering against the backdrop of towering dunes. The night was silent except for the occasional whisper of wind through sparse brush and the distant cry of desert wildlife. But something was off. The silence was too heavy, too deliberate. The soldiers felt eyes on them, unseen yet undeniable. Every flicker of light, every shifting shadow became suspect. The desert was no longer a backdrop, it was a participant. Maps and reconnaissance notes described the region as barren, yet ancient rock formations hinted at a history far older than the patrol itself. Small artifacts scattered across dunes, some inscribed with indecipherable markings, others resembling pincers or claws. Soldiers joked nervously that even the sand seemed to bear witness. That humor died quickly when footprints appeared overnight. Massive, too large for any human. Clawed impressions pressed deep into the hardened sand, leading in circles, then vanishing, as if swallowed by the earth. Communication with base was intermittent. Radios crackled with static. Only fragments of reports reached the command center. Unusual tracks observed, men unnerved, sightings unconfirmed. The logs were cryptic, dry, factual, but they could not contain the fear that had taken root. Every diary entry, every sketch, every annotation hinted at something beyond comprehension, a singular occurrence, one that defied the boundaries of ordinary desert patrols. The folklore of the region seeped into their awareness. Bedouin elders had long spoken of colossal scorpions that roamed under moonlight, guardians of the sands, creatures older than memory. They called them the shadowed hunters, telling of glowing eyes and immense pincers that could crush armor and bone alike. Soldiers tried to laugh it off, yet at night the wind carried sounds that matched the descriptions, clicks and scuttles, movements too deliberate and coordinated to belong to ordinary animals. By the second night, unease had grown into dread. The unit had split into small reconnaissance teams, each assigned to survey a different sector of dunes. Even with flashlights and maps, the desert seemed to bend reality. Dunes shifted subtly. Landmarks appeared in places they shouldn't. Compasses wavered inexplicably. The men joked that the desert itself was a labyrinth, but there was no humor left in their voices, only instinctive, bone-deep fear. Lieutenant Ben-Ari attempted to maintain order, walking the lines, speaking in calm tones, recording observations in meticulous detail. Yet even he could not deny the pattern emerging. Tracks that appeared and vanished, shadows that moved against natural light, a soundscape that mimicked human voices, yet belonged to nothing human. Something or someone was watching, testing, waiting. Every observation, every sketch, every hastily scribbled note fed into a growing dossier of unexplained phenomena. The soldiers trained to fight men found themselves facing a predator that seemed to exist between fact and legend. The desert was alive with whispers, echoes of ancient warnings, murmurs carried across dunes, telling of consequences for those who ventured too far. And yet they pressed on, driven by duty, pride, and the unspoken understanding that retreat meant surrender. Every step deeper into the Negev brought them closer to the unknown, closer to the night when their courage would be tested, when the desert's shadows would reveal the truth, or perhaps conceal it forever. The first official reports emerged weeks later, carefully typed, stamped, and filed in archives labeled Desert Reconnaissance, Negev, 1965. They were terse factual, yet beneath the clipped language an unease seeped through. One entry read, Patrol Bravo 2300 hours. Unidentified large tracks observed. Personnel report auditory anomalies. Standard procedure initiated. No casualties reported at time of filing. Yet the diaries tell a different story. Lieutenant Ben-Ari's handwriting, jagged and frantic, contrasted sharply with the sterile reports. We saw them. Shapes impossibly large, moving faster than any animal could. The desert itself seemed to guide them. The men described hearing claws clicking across dunes, scraping against rock, echoing through the night like a living metronome. Private Yitzhak Cohen noted in his journal that a pair of glowing eyes had appeared above the ridge, massive, unmoving, reflecting moonlight with an unnatural intensity. I froze, he wrote. For a moment I was certain they were watching our very souls, and then vanished. Footprints nearby, 3 times the size of a man's boot, disappeared entirely in the shifting sands. Reports from different units overlapped. A pattern emerged. Multiple sightings of enormous creatures, vanishing without trace. One officer recalled, "We found a vehicle, abandoned engine running. No sign of the driver. Only deep clawed impressions in the sand around it." Letters between commanding officers expressed disbelief, yet no one could explain the strange disorientation the soldiers experienced. Compasses fluctuated. Men reported hearing voices in the wind, whispers of warnings repeated in languages none of them understood. The press later published vague accounts. Desert Hazards claimed minor patrol disruptions. Officially, the events were dismissed as exaggeration hallucinations caused by extreme heat and isolation. But the journals and personal testimonies painted a different picture. Each entry described a tangible threat, tangible enough to shake trained soldiers to their core. Even medical reports hint at psychological strain. Insomnia, heightened anxiety, rapid heartbeat during night patrols. Some soldiers claimed hearing the clicking of massive pincers in their tents. Others spoke of shadows moving independently of any light source. The desert had become a stage for an unfolding terror, blending reality with the echoes of legend. Lieutenant Ben-Ari documented encounters with tracks so deep they suggested a creature weighing hundreds of kilograms. Claw marks lined rocks, curving unnaturally, scraping stone with precision. One photograph recovered decades later showed a silhouette at dusk, elongated, angular, towering over the dunes. Authorities dismissed it as a trick of light, yet the men who took it swore it captured something alive. The unit's movement logs revealed sudden detours. Men reported feeling compelled to avoid certain ridges. "There is something here," wrote one corporal. "Something old, patient, waiting." Even seasoned scouts admitted that the desert no longer seemed neutral. It had a consciousness, an awareness of their presence. Corroborating accounts came from local villagers and Bedouin guides. They spoke of enormous scorpions, guardians of the sands, creatures that walked in moonlight, their eyes reflecting like fire. Some guides drew crude diagrams noting pincers and segmented tails, eerily similar to what the soldiers had sketched. Folklore had crossed paths with the tangible. Reality blurred at the edges. By the end of the 3rd night, the patrol was disoriented. Equipment abandoned, radio contact intermittent. Multiple men missing their fate recorded only in the fragmentary notes. One report described hearing a scream carried by the wind, then silence. Another diary entry. "It watches us. It knows our fears and feeds on them." Even the official fact layer could not contain the dread. Reports spoke of anomalies, equipment failures, inexplicable tracks, sounds beyond explanation. Every log hinted at something the desert had kept hidden for centuries. something patient, something enormous, waiting. Long before the patrol ever set foot on the Negev sands, whispers circulated among the Bedouin tribes, tales of massive creatures that roamed beneath the moon. Enormous scorpions, their bodies glistening with an unnatural sheen, eyes reflecting starlight like lanterns suspended in darkness. These were the sand guardians, ancient, patient, and merciless. Travelers were warned, stray too far at night and you would vanish, leaving only the wind to carry your name. Elders described nights when the desert seemed alive. Dunes shifted subtly, creating illusions of movement. Rocks appeared to scrape themselves with invisible claws. Men laughed at these stories, dismissing them as superstition, meant to frighten children and outsiders. Yet as the patrol pressed into the dunes, disbelief turned to unease. Every whisper of wind carried a subtle rhythm, a click, a scrape, a pattern that unsettled even the most disciplined soldiers. Stories spoke of eyes in the darkness, not a pair, but dozens reflecting moonlight moving with intention. Some travelers claimed they could feel the gaze on their skin even with no creature in sight. Soldiers began to notice similar phenomena, glowing points atop dunes, fleeting shadows stretching unnaturally. The folklore was no longer distant, it was tangible, whispering its warnings into the ears of men who had never believed. The patrol found markings in the sand, clawed impressions, arcs carved deep into stone, tracks that were too large, too precise to belong to any known desert animal. They led in patterns as if the creatures were mapping the soldiers' movements. Lieutenant Ben-Ari noted in his journal, "The tracks guide us or mislead us. The desert has a will of its own." Every step forward became a negotiation with the unseen. By the second night, the wind carried voices, low murmurs sometimes repeating phrases in languages none of the men could recognize. The Bedouin guides listened intently, whispering, "It speaks. It tests." Soldiers began recording observations, hesitant yet compelled. Shadows danced at the edges of flashlight beams. Dust swirled with intent. The desert itself seemed to breathe around them. Fires were lit in small circles, casting trembling light across the dunes. Every movement of flame exaggerated shadows into monstrous shapes. The soldiers' nerves frayed. Whispers grew louder. The legends of old seemed to manifest before their eyes. The sand guardians were no longer stories, they were present, patient, watching, waiting. Some nights, fleeting glimmers of reflective surfaces appeared on distant dunes, shimmering like metal. Some swore it was eyes. Some thought it might be reflective scales. They were never close enough to identify. The desert kept its secrets well. Every sighting left more questions than answers, and more fear than comprehension. Elders had also warned of the desert's judgment. Anyone who entered unprepared would face consequences, limbs crushed, minds driven to terror, or vanish entirely. Soldiers began to feel the weight of those warnings, navigating the dunes carefully, avoiding certain ridges and depressions. Every instinct screamed that some places were forbidden. Animals reacted strangely. Desert foxes disappeared from their usual paths. Insects vanished from the sand. Even birds avoided certain sectors of dunes. The men observed this pattern, connecting it with the legends. Nature itself seemed to recognize the sand guardians, corroborating the Bedouin warnings. The desert was alive and aware. Sleep was impossible. Exhaustion deepened fear. Dreams carried the creatures into the minds of men. Glowing eyes in darkness, massive pincers, endless sands under unrelenting moons. Some men awoke screaming. Others recorded what they saw in dreams as if it were reconnaissance. The boundary between folklore and reality blurred. Lieutenant Ben-Ari kept meticulous notes, sketching tracks, measuring claw marks, noting distances, comparing them with Bedouin diagrams. Every alignment, every pattern hinted at intelligence. Creatures that could anticipate human movement, plan, observe, and remain unseen. Each page of the journal reinforced the legend and made it undeniably real. By the fourth night, small skirmishes with the unknown began. Equipment was disturbed. Radios malfunctioned. Sand shifted around vehicles, masking their presence. Shadows seemed to reach across dunes. The desert became a stage for unseen actors. Soldiers began to whisper the stories among themselves. It moves like the legends say. It waits. It watches. And yet for every report, every sketch, every observation, the Sand Guardians remained elusive, shimmering just out of reach. The desert, the folklore, and the soldiers' fears intertwined, creating a tapestry of dread and wonder. The line between fact and legend disappeared, leaving only the memory of glowing eyes, clicking pincers, and the unyielding expanse of the Negev. As the patrol ventured deeper into the Negev, a strange pattern emerged. Incidents of disappearance, unexplained sounds, and massive tracks repeated in different sectors. Every encounter seemed connected, as if the desert itself enforced a code. Each anomaly mirrored reports from other regions. The Sahara Sinai even stretches of the Arabian Desert. Solitary patrols, small units, scattered men, all haunted by shadows too large to be human. The soldiers began to speak in hushed tones of a motif, a recurring phenomenon, something ancient, predatory, and unseen. Lieutenant Ben Ari's journal noted, "It is not confined to one dune. It moves through space and time. We are not first. We will not be last." The motif of monstrous desert guardians appeared across folklore and military reports. Strange vanishings, glowing eyes, immense claws, all following a singular rhythm. Bedouin elders added context. Their warnings were no longer simple cautionary tales. They hinted at an intelligence behind the sightings, creatures that tested intruders, measured courage, patience, and fear. One elder described nights when travelers disappeared silently. They hear it first. The desert whispers, then strikes. Soldiers began to recognize that their experiences fit this pattern. The motif connected past and present, myth and reality. Reports from prior decades suggested similar motifs. World War II patrols in North Africa had documented giant arachnid-like impressions. Soldiers vanished without explanation. Logs mentioned clicking noises and shadows. Equipment malfunctioned. Compasses swung wildly. Echoes of those reports now resonated with the Negev patrol. Patterns repeated across deserts and time. A motif bridging geography and history. The men began to map the anomalies. Glowing eyes, clawed tracks, disturbed sand equipment failure. Each point connected to another, forming invisible lines, a network of disturbances, like veins of fear running through the desert. The motif became undeniable. Repetition made the strange familiar. Yet the familiarity brought no comfort, only anticipation of what might appear next. Even dreams began to reinforce the motif. Soldiers recorded visions of massive shadows looming over dunes, luminous eyes, rhythmic clicks. Dreams and reality overlapped. The motif existed both in memory and present observation, reinforcing a narrative the desert imposed, a story older than any soldier could imagine. Private Cohen noted a recurring pattern in whispers and sounds, a cadence in the clicks, a rhythm in the shifting sand. It was deliberate, intelligent, almost ceremonial. Each night repeated variations of the same ritual, approaching testing, disappearing. The motif was alive, shaping fear, orchestrating terror, teaching the men something, or punishing them. A sudden storm one night added weight to the motif. Wind tore through the dunes, masking the movement of unseen entities. The patrol huddled against sand and gusts. Yet despite the chaos, massive shapes seemed to glide effortlessly across the terrain. The storm became part of the ritual, nature cooperating with legend, reinforcing the pattern, confirming the motif. The men began to recognize zones of avoidance, ridges, depressions, or strange rock formations that were always involved in sightings or disappearances, a rhythm to their movement, a choreography dictated by the unknown. The motif tied geography, phenomena, and folklore together, an invisible map of menace, guiding who would survive, who would vanish. Lieutenant Ben Ari wrote, "The motif teaches us, it warns, it judges. Every encounter, every lost man, every fleeting glimpse is part of the same story, not random, deliberate, eternal." The desert repeated its lessons nightly, the same cadence, the same whispers. The motif became a lens, a framework, through which the patrol interpreted everything: shadows, clicks, eyes. Even after retreating to safer positions, the motif haunted the soldiers. The rhythm of the desert persisted in memory. Footsteps on dunes, echoes in the wind. Shadows seemed to follow even at the edge of the camp. The motif transcended space, a connective tissue of fear and legend, linking all desert encounters across time. By the fifth night, the patrol understood that the motif was their reality. The desert had a pattern, a purpose, a story told in sand shadows and whispers, a rhythm older than any human presence. The sand guardians were not random. They were consistent, deliberate, and eternal. A motif that threaded fact and folklore into a tapestry of dread. Night descended on the Negev like a living entity. The dunes stretched endlessly, their shapes shifting under a pale, indifferent moon. Shadows moved with a will of their own, bending and stretching across sand that seemed to breathe. Every footstep echoed unnervingly, as if the desert listened to their heartbeat. Lieutenant Ben Ari huddled with his patrol near a shallow wadi. Fires flickered weakly, casting trembling light across armored vehicles. The men's eyes darted constantly, scanning the horizon, the ridges, the valleys. Each shadow seemed alive, pulsing with anticipation. A faint click resonated through the night, then another, then dozens. Rhythmic, deliberate, unnatural. Like some ancient metronome counting down fate. Private Cohen froze, pointing toward a ridge, glowing eyes reflected dimly in the moonlight. Not one pair, dozens, shifting and blinking, moving independently. The men's breaths caught, terror settling in their chests. They had trained for combat, but nothing could prepare them for this. The wind carried low resonances, scraping and clicking across sand and stone. The patrol tried to advance, forming ranks, cautious, tense. But the ground beneath their boots shifted. Sand gave way. Some soldiers stumbled, every step uncertain. The desert was no longer neutral. It was predator stage and executioner. A massive shadow surged across a nearby dune, claws scraping sand, tail coiling, segmented body towering over the men, and then vanished, leaving only footprints, enormous, clawed, twisting impossibly, circling back on themselves. The soldiers were paralyzed, caught between disbelief and survival instinct. One vehicle was discovered abandoned, doors wide open, engine running, tracks surrounding it, clawed, some disappearing mid-stride. Official logs later described it as a desert anomaly, yet Ben Ari's journal detailed it. The earth itself rejected our presence, consumed our evidence, watched us like prey. Every object, every trace seemed alive, rearranged by unseen hands. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, human distorted, echoing across dunes, bouncing between the men, calling names not their own. Flashlights swung wildly. Only sand, only shadows. The scream persisted, stretching reality, each echo heavier than the last. Fear compounded with disbelief. The patrol tried to regroup. Radios dead, men calling names. Only echoes returned. Some glimpsed colossal forms moving just beyond light, massive pincers raised, tails lashing, bodies segmented and alien, clicking sounds, rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent, ritualistic, predatory. Journals noted the disappearances, Private Levi and Corporal Shmuel chasing shadows, never returning. Only enormous clawed footprints remained, twisting, spiraling, vanishing into nothing. The desert had claimed them, leaving a void that terror could inhabit. Glimmers appeared intermittently on distant dunes, fleeting reflections, shimmering like scales. Some swore they were eyes, others thought it might be reflections of starlight. Every flash induced panic. Every movement of sand seemed purposeful. The soldiers realized they were studied, measured, hunted, tested. By the fourth night, small skirmishes with the unseen intensified. Equipment disrupted, rifles jammed, compasses spun wildly. Sand swirled unnaturally. Shadows stretched multiplied. The desert became an arena of unseen actors. The patrol whispered Bedouin tales among themselves. It moves as they said. Waits, watches. The men began to record the impossible. Sketches of claw marks, patterns of tracks, glowing reflections, disturbed sand. Every observation reinforced the legend. The desert's folklore and their fact merged, a reality that could not be denied. Sleep became impossible. Exhaustion magnified fear. Dreams carried the creatures into consciousness. Glowing eyes, massive pincers, endless dunes under cold moons. Some men awoke screaming. Others recorded visions as reconnaissance. The line between folklore and reality blurred. Lieutenant Ben Ari kept meticulous notes, measurements of claws, tracks, distances, comparison with Bedouin sketches. Every alignment, every rhythm suggested intelligence. Creatures anticipating human movement, planning, testing. Each page confirmed the legend and made it undeniably real. By dawn, only half the unit returned, battered, delirious, silent. Journals filled with frantic notes, sketches of enormous tracks, claw marks, disturbed sand, sounds that could not belong to any known animal. The desert fell silent, yet the presence lingered, unseen, undeniably there, watching, remembering. The first light of dawn cast long shadows across the Negev. The patrol returned silent, faces pale, eyes wide, haunted, equipment scattered, journals torn, footprints marking paths that seemed to disappear mid-sand. The desert had given them back only fragments, fragments of truth, fragments of terror. Lieutenant Ben Ari stared across the dunes. Every ridge seemed to shimmer with memory. Every whisper of wind carried the echoes of that night. The men would never speak openly of what they saw. Some could not. The weight of the unseen pressed too heavily. They had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension, something patient, eternal, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The local guides told them the desert always remembered, that every intrusion, every careless step, every campfire left an imprint, and the sand guardians did not forgive. The soldiers had become part of a lineage, part of the desert's own story, intertwined with centuries of legend and forgotten truths. Reports were filed, sanitized for the archives. Desert anomalies, unexplained disappearances, personnel recovered with minor injuries. But the journals told a different tale. Sketches of massive tracks, glowing eyes, strange patterns in the sand. Whispers of screams, distorted sounds. Every line a testament to a presence that could not be fully recorded. The survivors spoke in hushed tones, around campfires in later missions, of shadows moving independently of light, of claw marks on rocks, of sand disturbed in impossible ways. Some laughed nervously, some shivered. All agreed that the desert had changed them, that its memory would follow them, always, lingering, waiting. Even decades later, whispers persisted. Travelers, patrols, and Bedouin alike recalled nights when eyes reflected moonlight, when the sand seemed to shift with intelligence, when clicks and scrapes echoed too deliberately. The desert did not forget. The stories did not fade. And the creatures, if they existed, remained patient, unseen, always near. Maps were studied, locations marked with warnings, certain ridges avoided. Patrols changed their routes. Yet those who ignored caution often did not return. The desert's pattern was consistent, deliberate, eternal. The motif of disappearance repeated. Shadows, tracks, whispers, vanished men. Each event feeding into the legend. Each legend feeding into fear. The survivors carried the desert home. In memories, dreams, nightmares. Every quiet wind, every flicker of shadow in the corner of an eye could trigger recall. A flash of sand, a glint of light, a sound too precise, too deliberate. The Negev was more than terrain. It was witness, predator, teacher. The folklore and fact intertwined, impossible to separate. What the soldiers saw was grounded in reality, yet shaped by the desert's mythic rhythm. The sand guardians existed in both, their presence tangible and yet untouchable, real enough to haunt the living, invisible enough to elude record. Lieutenant Ben Ari's final words in his journal lingered. We survived, but the desert remembers, and we are nothing but echoes, mere whispers among the dunes. That line would be recited by men in quiet moments, a caution, a warning, a confession of fear that could never be fully voiced. Even today, travelers speak in hushed tones of nights when the sand moves strangely, of tracks too large for any animal, of clicks in the distance, of eyes that reflect the moon like lanterns. The desert waits, patient, eternal. And the question remains, do we ever truly leave it, or does it leave its mark on us? Forever. The Negev Desert endures, timeless, indifferent, yet full of stories. Stories carried in the wind, in the sand, in the memories of those who survived. The legend of the Sand Guardians continues, as real perhaps as the desert itself, and as elusive as the shadows that watch from the dunes. You've just witnessed another dossier from Echoes of the Unknown, a story of shadows, disappearing men, and the desert that remembers. If you wish to uncover more, to walk closer to the edge of legend and fact, subscribe and step carefully, for the desert is patient and it never forgets.